It was a busy afternoon at a popular restaurant, and the manager was in one of his usual moods, impatient and arrogant. When a well-dressed black woman walked in quietly, he barely glanced at her before making a dismissive comment under his breath. His voice carried just enough for her to hear, and the smirk on his face made it clear he didn't care if she did. To him, she was just another customer he didn't have time for. What he didn't realize, though, was that she wasn't just a random visitor. This woman had walked through the doors for a very specific purpose. Unbeknownst to the manager, she was the lead inspector sent to evaluate the restaurant's operations, a key figure whose report could determine whether their business would continue to operate. What happens when she finally reveals her identity? And how will the manager respond to his own humiliation? Stay tuned. The manager strutted around the restaurant like he owned the place, barking orders at his staff and throwing half-hearted smiles at customers he deemed important. To him, the woman sitting quietly at the corner table didn't fit that category. Her calm demeanor seemed to irritate him even more, as though her very presence challenged his authority. What he didn't know was that she had already taken mental notes of every detail: the cleanliness of the tables, the disorganized staff, and the manager's behavior. She had been in the business long enough to know when something wasn't right, and this restaurant was ticking all the wrong boxes. Meanwhile, the staff whispered among themselves, wondering who the mysterious woman might be. She hadn't ordered anything yet, just sat there observing with a sharp, unshakable focus. The manager, still oblivious, was about to learn a lesson he would never forget, but not before digging himself even deeper. As the minutes ticked by, the manager grew more annoyed with the woman's presence. "She's just sitting there, wasting space," he muttered to one of the waiters. "Probably can't even afford to order anything." His words carried a venom that made the young waiter flinch, but he nodded nervously and went back to his tasks. The woman, however, remained composed, almost as if she hadn't noticed the manager's cutting remarks. But she had. Every word was etched into her memory. Her pen moved occasionally, jotting down notes in a small leather notebook, which only fueled the manager's suspicion. Who did she think she is? He grumbled under his breath. Meanwhile, one of the kitchen staff peeked out from behind the swinging doors. He'd seen inspectors before and began to suspect something. "What if she's not just some random customer?" he whispered to his coworker. The thought sent a ripple of unease through the staff. If she was here to inspect the place, the manager's behavior could spell disaster. Unaware of the growing tension among his team, the manager decided to approach her. With a forced smile, he sauntered over, ready to show her the door. But before he could say a word, she looked up, meeting his eyes with an unsettling confidence. "Is there a problem?" she asked, her voice calm but laced with authority. The manager hesitated, caught off guard, and for the first time, a flicker of doubt crossed his face. The manager stood frozen for a moment, her calm yet commanding tone unsettling him more than he cared to admit. He quickly recovered, masking his hesitation with a dismissive wave. "No problem at all," he said, forcing a grin. "Just checking to see if you're ready to order, or if you'll be moving along soon." His words carried a thinly veiled condescension, but the woman's expression didn't waver. "I'll be here a while longer," she replied evenly, her gaze steady. She leaned back slightly, observing him with an intensity that made him uncomfortable. He chuckled awkwardly and walked away, muttering under his breath again. But this time, the confidence in his stride had diminished. Back in the kitchen, whispers had turned to quiet panic. The waiter from earlier had shared his suspicions, and now the staff anxiously watched the woman from a distance. One of them begged the head chef to intervene, but he simply shook his head. "If she's who I think she is, it's already out of our hands." Meanwhile, the woman continued her observations. She noticed the hurried glances from the staff, the tension in their movements, and the way they avoided the manager. It painted a picture far more telling than anything the food or service could reveal. The manager, oblivious to the storm brewing around him, grew more agitated. He marched back to the woman's table, this time less concerned about subtlety. "Look, if you're not here to eat, I'm going to have to ask you to leave," he snapped, his patience wearing thin. The woman slowly set down her notebook and looked up at him again, her expression unreadable. "I'm afraid you don't have the authority to ask me to leave," she said calmly. Her words hung in the air, sharp and deliberate. Around them, the restaurant seemed to hold its breath. The staff froze, and even the customers nearby turned their heads, sensing that something significant was about to unfold. The manager blinked, caught off guard by her response. His frustration bubbled over, and he leaned in slightly, lowering his voice. "Listen, lady, I don't know who you think you are, but this is my asterisk restaurant, and I don't need anyone wasting my time or space. So unless you're here for a meal, I'm asking you, politely, to leave." The woman didn't flinch. Instead, she reached into her bag, pulling out a small leather folder. "Your restaurant, you say?" she asked, her voice calm, but now carrying an edge of authority. She opened the folder and placed an official-looking document on the table. The manager glanced at it, his face suddenly pale. It was a state-issued inspector's badge. Before he could react, she continued, "I've been here for over an hour, observing everything, from the disorganization in your kitchen to the unsanitary conditions in your dining area. But what concerns me the most is your behavior. Dismissive, rude, and completely unprofessional." Her voice was still steady, but there was no mistaking the weight of her words. The staff exchanged wide-eyed glances, the whispers growing louder. Some seemed relieved that someone was finally calling out the manager, while others looked terrified of what this would mean for their jobs. But just as the manager stammered, trying to defend himself, another voice interrupted. It was the head chef stepping forward from the kitchen. "Ma'am, if I may," he said cautiously. The inspector turned her attention to him, her expression unreadable. "I've worked here for years," the chef began, his voice steady but strained. "And I can't deny what you've seen. But the way this restaurant operates, it's not just the manager. There's more going on here than you might realize." The inspector narrowed her eyes, her curiosity piqued. The manager looked panicked now, his earlier bravado completely gone. Whatever the chef was about to say, it wasn't going to make things any easier for him. The room felt heavy with tension, every person waiting to see what would happen next. The inspector's gaze shifted from the head chef to the manager, her expression calm but sharp. "Go on," she said, inviting the chef to speak. The manager shot him a warning look, but the chef stood his ground, the weight of years of frustration finally breaking through. "This place has been running on borrowed time," the chef said firmly. The manager cuts corners to save money, expired ingredients, broken equipment, understaffed shifts. The health violations you've seen today are just the surface. He's known about these problems for months and refuses to fix them. And anyone who speaks up, well, they don't last long here." The inspector turned back to the manager, who looked as if the floor might give way beneath him. "Is this true?" she asked, her voice low but commanding. The manager opened his mouth, but no words came out. The truth was written all over his face. Just as the silence grew unbearable, the inspector reached into her bag again, pulling out a second document. "This isn't just a routine inspection," she said. "Your business has been flagged for ongoing violations, and I was sent here to decide whether you'll keep your license." The room erupted in murmurs, but she wasn't finished. She placed the paper on the table and leaned forward. "Based on what I've seen and heard today, This establishment is being shut down effective immediately. Guests rippled through the staff and customers, but the manager's face turned a ghostly white. Before he could protest, the inspector delivered the final twist. "As for you," she said, locking eyes with the manager, "expect a personal investigation into how you've been running this place. And don't think I haven't noted your attitude towards certain patrons. Discrimination won't be overlooked." With that, she stood and turned to the staff. "For those of you who've been caught in the crossfire, there are ways to report workplace mistreatment. Don't let this man silence you anymore." As she walked out, the restaurant was left in stunned silence. The staff exchanged glances, some relieved, others uncertain about what would come next. The manager, still frozen in place, now faced the full weight of his actions. For him, this was only the beginning. The restaurant's doors were locked by the end of the day, with a notice from the health department taped to the front window. The staff, though uncertain about their future, felt a strange sense of relief. Many of them had endured the manager's harsh treatment for years, and now they saw a chance to start fresh, maybe even at a place where their hard work would be appreciated. The manager, on the other hand, was left to grapple with the consequences. His arrogance and disregard had cost him everything, and the investigation looming over him promised to dig deeper into his practices. There was no escaping accountability this time. As for the inspector, she left the restaurant knowing her actions had not only upheld the standards of her job, but had also empowered those who had been silenced for too long. Sometimes justice arrives in unexpected ways, and her quiet strength had made all the difference.